Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Dexcom. Take control of your diabetes and live life to the fullest with Dexcom. And by Club 1921, where diabetes connections are made.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
This week, Lauren Bongiorno was diagnosed with type 1 as a child, and growing up, she showed every sign of success. She was a Division I athlete playing soccer in college and achieved the lowest A1C her endo had ever seen in a college kid. But while her care team celebrated, she was miserable.
And I was sitting there and it was like literally an out-of-body experience because I'm watching like the doctor high-five my mom, and high-five each other. And I was like, I'm not happy. I'm not happy.
Lauren shares how she took control and got that happiness back. She's now a diabetes coach. We talk about some common pitfalls, the pressure to be perfect, and what coaching really means. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Welcome to another week of the show. I am always so glad to have you here. You know, we aim to educate and inspire about diabetes with a focus on people who use insulin. As I'm taping the intro to this episode, I am, like you, sifting through some FDA approvals. These seem to be coming in fast and furious now, or at least as fast and furious as the FDA does anything. But after a very long logjam, this is all stopped up by COVID, it really seems like things are moving along. So to that end, this episode will not focus on Tandem's mobile bolus, which was just approved, bolus by phone, or the Eversense CGM 180-day wear approval. Those were the two biggies over the last week, and I am going to focus on them in upcoming episodes. Eversense should actually be next week, and Tandem a couple of weeks after that. As always, if you'd like to get your questions asked, please join us in the Facebook group, Diabetes Connections, the group. If you're not on Facebook, no problem. Shoot me an email, stacy@diabetes-connections.com. I have my own set of questions, but I always want to hear from you, and your questions are always fantastic, so please send them in. But there is a lot more to diabetes than technology. You all know that. And I wanted to share Lauren Bongiorno's story because I think this really resonates for parents of kids with type 1 and for adults with diabetes. Nobody's harder on us than we are on ourselves, right? And the pursuit of perfection is just going to mess you up. I'll let Lauren share her story, but just for background, she is the CEO and head coach at a company she founded called Risely. That's a bit of a play on how in diabetes, a rise isn't a good thing. An arrow up on your CGM, a higher A1C. Their website says, type 1 diabetes has given Rise a bad reputation, but we think it's time we reclaim it. I think that's really clever. And I think this is the first time I've spoken with a health coach on the show. So we talk about what exactly that is and why somebody would choose to work with a coach along with a medical provider. Here's my talk with Lauren Bongiorno. Lauren, thanks for spending some time with me and my listeners. I'm so excited to talk to you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on, Stacey. I'm so looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, I feel like we've connected and I've seen you, all over social media. So I'm really excited to kind of hear more of your story and share your experiences because just the little bit that I know, I feel like you're kind of the embodiment of why perfect doesn't always work out with diabetes, if I could say that.
Yeah, I think you can say that. And it's so interesting because I think that if there's one thread of my entire life that I can really look at, it's this striving for perfection and then getting too close to perfect and realizing, oh, wait, this is not what I wanted. So It definitely applies to diabetes for sure.
Well, let's back up and explain what we're talking about here. Let's start closer to the beginning. You were diagnosed at age 7. Do you remember any of that?
Yeah, I definitely remember it. I remember it was the day after Halloween. I remember my mom being on the phone with my dad in the kitchen, and I had just had a tantrum. And I think she was trying to figure out if it was a 7-year-old tantrum or if it was a something's wrong tantrum. And I had been losing a lot of weight. And when you're 7 years old, and I was really like skinny as a child, and you lose, 20 pounds, there's definitely some signs that something else might be going on. And I was drinking so much water. And I remember hearing my mom, talk to my dad and them deciding to take me to the doctor. So I went to my regular pediatrician's office and I was sitting there, and the distinct memory I have is of my mom and the doctor on the other side of the door, and my mom hysterical crying. And if you know my mom, she is like the strongest woman. She is so independent, so strong. And I think that was the first time I ever heard her cry, or at least I remember her ever crying. Mm-hmm. So I was like, oh, something is wrong. And then I ended up in the hospital, stayed there for a few days. And when you're a kid and you have everybody around you crying and saying it's going to be okay, and you're so strong, and you also at the same time don't really understand what that means, it sets you up for an interesting path and an interesting life. And definitely now looking back, a lot of things that I think I didn't realize was going on in my mindset and in my own personal development and relationship with diabetes.
And so fast forward to a story that you tell on your website, which is when you were in college and kind of realized that this was not sustainable. But I'm curious, between 7 and 19, were you that model diabetes kid?
Yeah, that's actually the phase I don't talk about as much. And it's interesting because I think it's the phase that most people and most of our clients at Risely relate to. And so that stage from 7 to 18 really it was me just being in a very reactionary mode with my diabetes. So it was like, oh, your blood sugar is high. Shoot, let's correct it and get it down. Oh, shoot, it's low. All right, let's drink some juice really fast so you can get back on the soccer field. And it was very kind of ping-pongy. And I never fully felt like I had the energy or the mood that I think that I could have in hindsight now, because I didn't realize like how much that ping pong was impacting me. And I also really didn't care. Like for me, what was most important, and for my parents and what they instilled in me, was A, you're going to do anything you want in life. Diabetes isn't going to stop you. And B, as long as when you go to the doctor, your A1C is in a good place, then you're good and you're healthy. And my A1C was never crazy. It was always in the high 6s, low 7s. And that was before CGM, right? So I was diagnosed 21 years ago. And so there was no really concept of time and range being more important than A1C and things like that. I think that during that time, it was a lot of, because I didn't want diabetes to stop me, I took that as don't slow down to pay attention to your diabetes. It was very much do the bare minimal to keep your numbers not from being crazy, but just in a healthy range, or healthy to your doctor standards or to your parents' standards. And that time of ping-ponging up and down, when I eventually got to college, I realized that, wait a second, I was recruited to play Division I soccer in college. It was the first time that I really started to connect my mind and my body and my numbers, and really realizing that I was not taught a lot about my whole body, like this whole body approach of food and nutrition and glycemic index and eating for energy and eating for better blood sugars and exercise for specifically insulin sensitivity and what happens with weight training. And we're working out, 2 times a day when you're playing soccer in college. And those exercises are impacting my blood sugars in different ways than I had seen in the past. And I was trying to compete with a lot of other players for spots. And now my blood sugar is 300. And now I have a disadvantage. And I didn't like that because I was a very competitive still am person. And I took this as an opportunity to become more independent and tuned in to my diabetes and craft it in the way that would make me feel successful and would make me feel in control. And as an effect of that, what I did was I became obsessed. I became obsessed with my numbers, obsessed with the food that I was putting in my body, obsessed with exercising, like over exercising, all of this to the point where I actually lost my menstrual cycle for 4 years because my body fat percentage was so low. And it wasn't like I wasn't eating. It wasn't like I was suffering from an eating disorder in that sense. It was literally just a disorder of almost like perfection in the name of wanting to control my diabetes and my numbers so badly. And when you start to see the results of that, you're like, okay, I'm doing this right. And that is the story I tell a lot. And a lot of people know is I came home from college. I think I was a sophomore or junior in college. I had my endocrinologist check up, and when you're a teenager, your parents still come to the endocrinologist with you sometimes, the doctor. And so I remember sitting on the chair and my mom next to me, and the doctor coming in, who was my pediatrician kind of doctor from, my diabetes doctor from childhood. And she was like, her hands were in the air and she was like, Lauren, I have never seen a college student with a 5.7 A1C. This is the best A1C you've ever had. This is incredible. How did you do it? She like calls the nurse in. The nurse comes in. She's like, can you talk to my other patient? Like this other girl in the other room who's in college and her A1C isn't great. And I was sitting there and it was like literally an out of body experience because I'm watching like the doctor high five my mom, I'm watching them high five each other. And I was like, I'm not happy. I'm not happy. And you often think that your blood sugars being perfect or your A1C being perfect, that is the sign of happiness. It's a sign of health. It's a sign of perfection. And oh, you've made it. And I would never, ever want to put my body through what it went through and go back to that place. And it was really because of my mindset. It was my mindset. It had nothing to do with the 5.7 A1C because my last A1C most recently was a 5.6. But I'm in like a totally different place. I eat pizza. I have donuts. I have, what I want. I have a fabulous relationship with exercise and with food. So it's all about the intention behind what you're doing. And that's what I realized most in that moment.
I have so many questions, Lauren. How did you get then from, you're still very young at 19. I'm thinking my daughter is 20. My son is almost 17. At 19, how did you get from, I have this great A1C and I'm not happy, to now, and I'm sure it was a journey, I'm sure it didn't happen overnight, to I have a great A1C and I'm happy I'm eating pizza and I'm exercising the way I want to? Right back to Lauren, but first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Dexcom. It's really hard to remember what things were like for us before we started using the Dexcom. I haven't forgotten. What I mean is it is so different now. When Benny was a toddler, we were doing something like 10 finger sticks a day. Even when he got older, we still did at least 6 to 8 every day, and more when he wasn't feeling well or when something was off. But with each iteration of Dexcom, we've done fewer and fewer sticks. The Dexcom G6 eliminates finger sticks for calibration and diabetes treatment decisions. I think all the time about Betty's little worn-out fingertips, and it makes me so glad that Dexcom has helped us come so far. His fingertips are now healthy and smooth, which I never thought would happen when he was in preschool. If your glucose alerts and readings from the G6 do not match symptoms or expectations, use a blood glucose meter to make diabetes treatment decisions. Learn more, go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Dexcom logo. Now back to Lauren. She's talking about how she found her way to being more kind to her body and to herself.
I would say that it was definitely a culmination of a few different things. Yeah. The first thing was that moment really was a defining moment for me, but it also just opened up more ways of thinking about my life and my just understanding of myself. I had started doing yoga around that time in college, and yoga does this incredible thing of giving you space to really watch your body and watch your patterns and watch your thoughts without judgment. That's like at the root of the philosophy of yoga, or at least one of them. And what I realized was I wasn't happy with myself and with my identity. That diabetes was something that my whole life I kind of pushed away. And it was always in the background, but I never fully accepted it. And if you don't accept the body that you're in my experience, you try to overcompensate in other areas. So you try to overcompensate in being perfect with food, being perfect with exercise, being perfect with your blood sugars. And ultimately, I had this like moment at the doctor's office where I just looked, it was almost like a flashback in a movie where I looked back in my time so far in college and I'm like, everybody is going out and having fun. And I'm like saying no to going out to dinner with friends so I can make my organic broccoli and fish or whatever it was, because I didn't want to be tempted by having bread or pasta at this like restaurant they were going to, or I would, not want to stay out late or even like drink in college. I didn't drink a lot, like barely drank in college because I wanted to go to a 6 a.m. yoga class the next day because I know that really benefited my mind and my body in the way that I thought it needed to. And I just realized that I didn't want to live a life that A, wasn't sustainable, and B, I wasn't happy. Like, I think that it's important to understand your core values. And I think my values were shifting away from perfection and approval of others or approval of my doctor, my family, and like more of being a little bit of a renegade and being like, well, what do I want my life to look like? What do I want my relationship to food look like? What do I want my relationship to just everything that I do look like? And what came out of that was this realization that what I was doing didn't match up. And so what I was doing, it wasn't sustainable if I wanted to lead a healthy and happy life. And so I wanted to find a way of how could I have a healthy diabetes, journey with my blood sugars and not have complications later on in life and not be in that phase of my life where I was from 7 to 18, where I was just ping ponging all over the place and not being aware of my blood sugars and not having predictability and those types of things. And how could I also not be on the other end of the spectrum where I was super restrictive, obsessive over health? There had to be a happy medium. There had to be a better way. And I had tried so many different diets at that point: high carb, low fat, keto, high fat, low carb, like don't eat bread, don't eat processed this, don't eat packaged food, that I realized that it was just exhausting. It was exhausting to try to apply an outer rule book to my life. And I wanted to start looking at my inner knowledge and creating that rule book for myself.
Let's talk a little bit about coaching. Can you explain a little bit about what coaching is? Because as a parent of a kid with type 1, we have only ever seen the endocrinologist, and then I've relied on our educator and frankly, the diabetes online community.
Yeah.
So, what's a coach?
Of course. So a coach really is somebody who is helping you with accountability, is helping support you in getting to the vision that you have for yourself, and is there to reflect back patterns and observations and help you with behavior change. So for example, a lot of parents of kids that we work with in our programs, they're coming because they realize, okay, we see our endocrinologist or our doctor a few times a year, and there's so much time in between that we want to be able to understand how to get our child's numbers better overnight or in the morning time or when they're going to play sports. And we know that it's really about the day-to-day things and not so much the let's go to the doctor and just depend on them to tell us everything. We want to essentially take ownership over this and understand what's happening with their hormones, with their insulin sensitivity, with their time of the month, if they're females who are going through that phase that can be really challenging, or just growth spurts in general, with nutrition and all of this knowledge. So I really, at Risely, we focus on A, behavior change, B, published research, and then C, our client data that we've had since 2015. And it's a lot of work of a combination of mindset and the blood sugars and the emotional impact that diabetes has on you. So you can think of it as a supplement to your endocrinologist, your CDE, and and a therapist or a mental health provider if you have that.
I get a little nervous when people who don't have a medical degree are helping. But at the same time, I understand that, like I said, I got most of our information from the community, right? When I started a Dexcom on my son at age 9, I didn't call the endo. I mean, I literally put it on Twitter and was like, I don't understand this. Can you help me? What am I looking for? So I'm kind of speaking out of both sides of my mouth, Lauren. But I guess the frank question is, talk to me about helping people with type 1 as a coach when you are not a diabetes educator, when you do not have a medical degree.
I absolutely love this question. So all of the coaches on our team are nationally board certified health coaches. With that, at the root, health coaching is about helping you get unstuck by helping you develop the tools and the strategies to become aware of your blocks and your patterns so that you can move toward that vision that you have for yourself or for your child. A lot of times people know what they should be doing, right? They know when you slow down and you take time, what's happening with your blood sugars. What we're doing is we provide a space for you that is a dedicated space and dedicated time to slow down and hold you accountable for looking at your Dexcom clarity and looking through the patterns of your blood sugar, your child's blood sugars for the past 2 weeks and saying, oh, wow, we didn't even realize that at 8 a.m. every morning or 7 a.m. when they get on the school bus, that their blood sugar is really spiking and we're rushing, right? We're rushing to get out at the door. So we're not giving them a pre-bolus. We're not doing, drinking water in the morning, or we're having, just a waffle instead of maybe adding a little bit of protein in that. And let's get curious. What would happen if you did X, Y, and Z, right? Or putting them in the driver's seat most of the time and saying, what do you think would change the outcomes for these numbers? Like, what are the things that you've noticed have worked for you that you want to be doing more? It's identifying the gaps in your knowledge, giving them the accountability and the relatability to somebody living with diabetes, as all our coaches do, that they need, and helping them with the implementation and creating sustainable change. We've coached over 350 clients over the past 6 years now. And if you look at all of that client data, it speaks and it says something. And what it says is that there is a need for coaching because diabetes is a condition where it is impacting you 24/7. And depending on seeing your doctor, which the healthcare system in America specifically is very much a top-down model approach, where you're sitting there and you're waiting to receive your next move, receive what your basal changes, receive what you should do next. It doesn't set you up for success. The education at diagnosis doesn't set you up for success. The touch bases with your doctor doesn't set you up for independence. And we have a choice to either follow that or to create a new system and create a new way. And that's essentially what we're doing.
So let me ask you some specific questions if I could, like kind of pick your coaching brain here.
Okay.
This time of year, without diabetes, many of us are thinking about changing what we eat. I'm going to diet this year. I'm going to lose that weight I gained. And it never works because I think we all know that kind of fad dieting or that short-term stuff doesn't work, but we do it anyway. So can you speak a little bit, because you've been successful with this. You know, you mentioned you wouldn't go out to eat with your friends because you had to eat a certain way at home. How do you get there? How do you create those changes that really do make a long-term difference?
I think that we have to stop thinking that there's this next one thing, this next diet, this next outer rule book or whatnot that is going to be the solution to all of our problems. With our methodology in coaching specifically, and in my own personal life, what has made the biggest difference is really holistically looking at the areas of your life that impact your health, from your relationships to your self-worth and your self-love to your, with diabetes, it's nutrition and relationship with food, it's stress management, it's your sleep, it's your hormones and your understanding of all of that. It's a holistic approach. And a holistic approach, it can't happen overnight. And so diets and things like that with food, if you've tried to do it in the past and you've gotten through up to Wednesday and then you're like, shoot, falling down, falling off the horse, like, all right, we're going to start over on Monday, which we've all been there. It's so fascinating that we keep going back to doing that same thing instead of realizing, wow, that doesn't work. Right. And so what I like to say is, don't set a goal that has anything to do with a metric, whether it's weight or even with A1C and specifically. Set the vision that you have for yourself. And if you set the vision that you have for yourself, how do they feel? What do they look like? How are they operating from day to day? What are they thinking? Who are they at their core? Then you start making decisions on a day-to-day basis that support that vision, and there's less pressure. And when there's less pressure of oh shoot, my A1C or my blood sugar isn't better than it was yesterday when I woke up, or the scale is the same today than it was yesterday, there's more chance of it actually lasting longer because you're not going to feel as defeated. So if you want to feel somebody who is energized and who is really fitting good in their clothes or just confident, set that as your vision of yourself. And then on a day-to-day basis, focus on doing things that support that vision.
Let me ask you if I could, and this will be for people who live with type 1, adults, young adults, older adults, but not parents yet. We'll get to them later. Can you give us some advice perhaps, or a couple of tips to have, more confidence with type 1? And as you said, not necessarily how to get your A1C down or more time in range, but just some good stuff for this year.
Yeah, I love that. So I would say the first thing is to lean into your diabetes. So many of us often think that the diabetes part is the shadow part of us, and it's the part that we have to hide and we have to push away. And if that is your underlying belief that I can't be loved if people know that I have diabetes, or if I'm showing my insulin pump, or I won't be accepted onto the soccer team or football team or whatever it is, if that is your subconscious root belief, then you're going to operate from that place, and you are not going to want to be checking your blood sugar in public. You're going to wait until after you're done eating with your friends or drinking to go to the bathroom and give yourself, a shot or give yourself your insulin, and it's setting yourself up for, higher blood sugars all night long. So there are so many benefits of just leaning in and coming from a place of me for years, hiding my pump, not letting people know that I had diabetes,
Wow.
not telling my now fiance until 3 months in that I had diabetes. It is so freeing and such a relief when you can just show up as your full self. And it has benefits of obviously your mindset, how confident you are, and of your numbers as well. So I would think that that's the first tip I would have, because it's a more of a mindset, emotional tip that will take you so far.
Yeah.
And then on a numbers standpoint, I would say to focus on 1/4 of the day. Diabetes is like a Rubik's Cube where there's 1,000 different pieces that there's at any one given time. I described it recently. I was being interviewed for an article and they were asking me to describe what a day in the life of diabetes. And I essentially said it's like a seesaw with 50 different factors piling up on either side at any given time, and you trying to find the centerpiece, right? So there are so many different factors. And the idea is to not get overwhelmed by all those factors. Because if you're overwhelmed, you're going to be paralyzed and you're not going to do anything, and you're not going to want to move forward, and you're going to feel defeated. So try to look at 1/4 of the day that maybe it's your most out of range section, whether it's overnight, morning, afternoon, or evening, and just commit to working on that. Just commit to maybe pre-bolusing at dinner time, or commit to actually putting your CGM alarm on or on a different ringtone so you wake up in the middle of the night if it's high, since that's like the longest amount of time you want to be in range essentially for your overall health. Choose that 1/4 of the day, and then once you nail that, then move on to the next piece. But diabetes is always this thing that it's continuous learning. And you want to be able to have the energy to sustain until there is a cure. And we don't have to lower your A1C 5 points or 3 points or even 2 points in the next 30 days or 90 days. We can work rather on building the habits that support that A1C.
What is your advice to parents of kids with type 1 in the new year? Like, what should we be thinking? How can we help our kids grow up? This is a big challenge. Happy, healthy, independent, not too worried about diabetes, but worried enough.
Oh my gosh. Yes. And we were talking about this off air too, Stacey, where it's interesting because we've coached so many people who are in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and beyond who have had diabetes since they were kids. And we've seen a lot of their challenges that they're coming to us with today, that a lot of it is rooted in their childhood and how their maybe parents or their caregivers or their doctors spoke about diabetes to them, or how they were trained to relate to their diabetes. And so when we see the parents of T1D kids in our group coaching program or in our one-on-one programs, we're watching and we're seeing how they're relating to their child's diabetes and what their child is, how they're relating to their diabetes. And we're able to help shape them in a better direction so that they're not ending up where the kid is, 30 years old, coming back to us being like, my mom did did coaching with you guys when I was younger. And I feel like I need to come back, right? Like it's helping them now instill those things that we wish as coaches and the older people in our programs wish that they had when they were children. So I think there's a few different messages that I would share. One is your goal as a parent is not to help your child avoid suffering and avoid all of the highs and all of the lows and all of those things all the time. Your goal and your job is to be there for them in a way where they feel like they can talk to you, they can come to you, and you could observe maybe what you're seeing in their blood sugars or in their behavior in a teammate kind of way. So kids are going through so much with their hormones and with development, and especially in their preteen and teenage years, just fitting in general. And then when you add diabetes on top of it, there's this extra layer that just comes with it. And so one of my least favorite things is when you hear a parent or a doctor say, oh, that child, they're just being so non-compliant, right? They're not testing their sugar. They're not doing this. They're just not being responsible. We have to put stricter rules on them, or we can't let them go out, or we can't do that. That isn't going to help, right? What that you really need to do is to help them get to the root of why they're feeling that way and why they're behaving that way. So one thing that we work a lot with parents is on helping them understand what their child's goals are, which for a lot of them, it's to have the cupcake at school with their friends or to be able to go out and have a sleepover with their friends and not have their mom call them 26 times, right? Which I always joke about because I'm like, now there's Dexcom Share. When I was a child trying to have a sleepover, my mom didn't even have Dexcom to like look at. I'm pretty sure she sat in the car outside the person's house for like the whole entire night. But it's valid, right? And the kids and what they want, it's this balance between wanting to keep your kids safe and also wanting them to just be a kid. So I think that a lot of the time it's about you as a parent wanting to protect them by not burdening them and just by taking away, all of the jobs that they're doing with their diabetes or their tasks or making it simple with like carb counting for them or only putting quote unquote healthy food or low glycemic foods on their plate, but that might not actually be what's going to help them for the long run. So really, I think for any parent listening, this to me is one of the hardest jobs. You guys are all heroes. I can't imagine. I look at my mom now and my dad and I'm like, thank you. Like I had no idea what you were really going through and that job that extra job you had when I was diagnosed, and you're doing great. And I think that you can do quote unquote all the perfect parenting in the world, and your child, they're still going to have challenges later on. So the goal is really to set them up to be independent, to care about how they feel, to care about their numbers, but also to not be limited by their diabetes and to find that balance.
I'm just curious, did you ever go back to your endocrinologist who was like, yes, this is amazing, like the high-fiving doctor? Like, does that doctor know that you talk about it this way?
So the funniest thing about it is I adored that doctor. I love her. We follow each other on Facebook. Sometimes when I speak at local JDRF events, she's there. Love her. And I think that she's probably seen me talk about it a little bit on social media for sure. We've never like addressed it specifically, but it's not about her. That wasn't her fault. She was celebrating me like I think a parent would celebrate a child who had an A1C like that. And I think the bigger issue is really the lack of emphasis on mindset and on the mental and emotional impact diabetes has on children and teenagers and adults for that matter with diabetes.
Hey, I'm just curious, and I always ask guests this, you don't have to answer. What kind of tech do you wear? What are your diabetes devices, if you don't mind sharing?
Yeah, so I wear an Omnipod and the Dexcom G6. I was on shots for my first 2 years living with diabetes, and then I went to a Medtronic wired pump for about, I would say, 14 years. And then the last 6 years, I'm not sure if somebody can add this math up if I'm on the right track, but it should all equals 21. The last 5 or 6 years I've been on an Omnipod, and I just love, love, love that it doesn't have a wire. And that works for me personally.
Before I let you go, talk to me a little bit about your partnership with a couple of nonprofits. I know that you at Risely want to make more of a difference than just with coaching. So who are you working with? What are these about?
Yeah, so we're here to help create the short-term change for individuals impacted by type 1 diabetes and families, and the long-term change with diabetes care. So our approach is community-based. It's collaboration. It's how can we all take the best of our missions and lift each other up. And so ways in which we collaborate with the community, number one, we have Kyler Cares, which is a nonprofit organization that provides grants for continuous glucose monitors and insulin pumps for children and young adults living with type 1 diabetes. And Kyle Banks is the founder. He actually played Mufasa on Broadway in The Lion King. And he is an incredible human being. We actually found out recently when we were together that we have the same diabetes anniversary, November 1st. So that was fireworks were going off because we already loved each other so much. But we're thrilled to partner with them because I think because I was diagnosed as a kid and so many people on our team were also diagnosed as kids, we have a special place in our heart for young adults and the children who don't have access to those things. And there's a direct correlation between your household income and your A1C and your diabetes control. And so we really want to be able to give back in that way and to help support those people. And then secondary to that, we have our Together T1D Impact Fund, which partnerships that we, work with in the community, they're able to donate to that fund to help give coaching scholarships to people who face significant barriers to healthcare to our coaching programs. And all the people who come through our programs through the scholarship, they're carefully selected and, have an in-depth review process, but it really allows us to be able to impact the community on that intimate level.
It's so interesting to hear like how much, I know it didn't happen overnight, but like how much you are doing. When you look back at that 19-year-old with that amazing A1C, but that not so amazing life, what do you think? You've come so far.
In a way, I feel like I had so many years of struggling with my diabetes that it was a blessing in a way. It was such a blessing because it brought me here, and we've impacted so many people's lives with diabetes. And, women who weren't able to have babies, they've had miscarriages after miscarriage because, maybe it's related to diabetes, and then finally bring a healthy baby into this world because their A1C is down. Or to the parent who their child is diagnosed and they feel like there is no possible way and they don't understand how they can, go to a soccer game and not completely tank their blood sugars. And then they're able to, and they feel that their child has that sense of freedom back and confidence back. All these little things. It's why we do what we do. There is so much passion behind what we do, so much intention, so much integrity, and so much hope that what we're doing can continue to be a ripple effect and impact people on an even larger level than we're doing now. And that's what keeps us going every single day. So I think 19-year-old me, or even 7-year-old me, who is standing in front of my gym class. My mom recently found a video. I was standing in front of my gym class after getting diagnosed, doing a fundraiser at my school with my little pigtails and limited tube shirt on. It was so cute. And that girl was, I feel like, meant to do this all along. And it doesn't mean that there's not challenges. It doesn't mean that there's not roadblocks, but it means that those things are just there to push me to keep going and push me to realize how worth it this is.
That's great. Oh my gosh, I love that. Lauren, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me, Stacey.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
More information about Lauren and coaching and Risely, and you can read her story. And she's been on some national media. She's got great videos. All of that is linked up at diabetes-connections.com, as we do every week. Every episode has its own page. If you head on over there and click on episodes, you will find them all. There's also a very robust search. And I say that because we are up to, this is episode 455. So if there's a topic that you're interested in, we have likely covered it. Obviously, we haven't covered everything, and please send me your suggestions. But if you just type it into the search box, it really is, I'm really thrilled with my web folks. I'm stuttering around because I had nothing to do with it, but I asked them to make me a great search, and they did. And you can also search by topic, by date, whatever suits your needs. So please check that out. We have some great shows coming up. Boy, there's so much going on these days. Every Wednesday, I do In the News Live, and that's on social media. And then I turn that into a podcast episode. That's every Friday, 5 or 6 minutes of just headlines and in the news stuff for the diabetes community. Next week, you should be hearing from Eversense. I'm working on that episode right now. We're going to talk about their longer wear. And, a lot of you already have commented in the Facebook group about, worries about this device and who is it for. I got to tell you, Benny is super eager for this because of wrestling and his sports. Think about a CGM that you can't knock off, right? So I'm not here to endorse them, but I am here to say, let's talk to them and find out more about this option. We're also going to talk about Tandem. I'm waiting because while they just got FDA approval, they have an earnings call later this month, and I want to wait until after that because some interesting things may come out. So we'll be speaking to them, and that episode will probably air in early March. But in between those two, I have an interview with the folks at Pixar, and I have a great story about why there is diabetes technology featured in Turning Red. This is the newest Pixar movie debuting on Disney Plus in March. And so look for that episode probably right before the movie comes out. We've taped it. I have to hold it. Sometimes these things are embargoed, and this was one of those cases. So I'm really excited to bring that to you. All right. Thank you, as always, to my editor, John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Stacey Sims. I'll see you back here soon. Until then, be kind to yourself.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacy Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.